After World War II, the world did not find peace. Instead, it entered a new and far more dangerous era, the Cold War. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged from the ruins of the war and began a global struggle for dominance. This was not a war fought on traditional battlefields. It was a conflict driven by ideology, influence, and fear, and at its center stood nuclear weapons. By the 1950s and 1960s, both nations had accumulated massive nuclear arsenals. Each side possessed enough weapons to destroy the planet several times over. This terrifying reality gave rise to a doctrine known as mutually assured destruction. If one side launched a nuclear strike, the other would respond, and the result would be total annihilation. There would be no winners, only the end of civilization. Ironically, this balance of terror was meant to prevent war, but instead, it trapped the world in constant anxiety. People lived under the shadow of nuclear catastrophe. Fallout shelters were built. Emergency drills were practiced. Humanity learned to coexist with the possibility of its own extinction. In 1959, the Cold War moved dangerously close to American shores. A socialist revolution led by Fidel Castro brought a Soviet-friendly government to power in Cuba. For the United States, this was unacceptable. A communist ally of Moscow now existed just 150 kilometers from Florida. Tensions escalated rapidly. In April 1961, the United States attempted to overthrow Castro through the Bay of Pigs invasion. The operation failed. Rather than weakening Cuba's leadership, it pushed Havana closer to Moscow and convinced Cuban leaders that an American invasion was inevitable. At the same time, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev faced a strategic disadvantage. The United States had deployed nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, placing Soviet territory within immediate striking distance. Khrushchev wanted to restore balance and send a clear message. In the summer of 1962, the Soviet Union secretly began installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. These weapons could reach major American cities within minutes. Khrushchev aimed to protect Cuba under a Soviet nuclear shield and gained psychological leverage by positioning missiles near U.S. borders. In October 1962, American U-2 reconnaissance planes discovered the missile sites. The photographs left no doubt. The Cuban Missile Crisis had begun. On October 22nd, President John F. Kennedy addressed the world in a televised speech. He declared the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba unacceptable and announced a naval blockade of the island. American warships surrounded Cuba to prevent further weapon shipments. The message was clear: withdraw the missiles or face military confrontation. The Soviet Union refused to back down. It insisted the missiles were defensive and condemned the blockade as illegal. For 13 days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. Both sides placed their forces on high alert. The United States raised its strategic forces to DEFCON 2. Nuclear-armed bombers patrolled the skies. Soviet naval units continued toward the blockade. Every decision carried the risk of catastrophe. One mistake could end everything. October 27, 1962, later became known as Black Saturday, the most dangerous day in human history. Estimates suggest that if nuclear war had erupted, hundreds of millions of people would have died within weeks, followed by global collapse. While world leaders argued above the surface, the decisive moment of the crisis unfolded deep underwater. Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov was a Soviet naval officer who had joined the Navy at a young age. During World War II, he served in the Pacific Fleet and took part in the Soviet campaign against Japan. At 19, he witnessed the dawn of the nuclear age as atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, events that left a permanent mark on his understanding of war. After the war, Arkhipov graduated from the Caspian Sea Naval Academy and steadily rose through the ranks. He was known as calm, disciplined, and thoughtful under pressure. In 1961, he became deputy commander of the nuclear submarine K-19. During a training mission, K-19 suffered a catastrophic reactor cooling failure. A nuclear meltdown was narrowly avoided, but radiation flooded the submarine. Many crew members later died from radiation exposure. Arkhipov survived, deeply changed by the experience. 1 year later, he faced the most important decision of his life: As the Cuban Missile Crisis escalated, the Soviet Navy deployed 4 Foxtrot-class submarines toward Cuba. Each carried a nuclear-tipped torpedo. Communication with Moscow was unreliable, so commanders were authorized to use these weapons without direct approval if they believed war had begun. Arkhipov, holding the rank of Commodore, served as a senior officer of the flotilla. He was aboard submarine B-59 as second captain. By October 27th, conditions aboard B-59 were unbearable. The submarine had remained submerged for days. Batteries were nearly depleted. Air conditioning had failed. Temperatures soared. Oxygen levels dropped. The exhausted crew was barely functioning. That day, B-59 was detected by American naval forces, led by the aircraft carrier USS Randolph. Unable to communicate with the submarine, U.S. ships began dropping small practice depth charges, intended as warning signals. Inside B-59, the explosions were terrifying. Cut off from the outside world, Captain Valentin Grigorievich Savitsky and political officer Ivan Semyonovich Maslenikov believed war had begun. Convinced they were under attack, Savitsky ordered the nuclear torpedo prepared. The weapon had destructive power comparable to Hiroshima. Soviet protocol required unanimous approval from 3 senior officers. Savitsky agreed. Maslenikov agreed. Arkhipov did not. He argued that the explosions were warnings, not an attack. If the Americans wanted to destroy them, they already would have. Launching the torpedo could trigger a nuclear war that would destroy civilization. After a heated argument, Savitsky backed down. The torpedo was never launched. B-59 surfaced. There was no war. The following day, diplomacy ended the crisis. The Soviet Union withdrew its missiles from Cuba. The United States pledged not to invade Cuba and secretly agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey. Arkhipov returned home without recognition. He was reprimanded for surfacing. His role remained secret for decades. He died in 1998, unaware that history would one day call him the man who saved the world. Now, you know his name.